Hello, everyone. Welcome to our fifth panel of the Outer Space Security Conference. I'm very happy to say that we once again have a wonderful set of panelists for this fifth panel. This fifth panel will explore who can achieve space security, the need for diversity to reach PAROS. Joining us today virtually, I have the pleasure to introduce Patricia Lewis, who is the Research Director of the International Security Program at Chatham House. So here in the room, we have Benjamin Silverstein. He is a research analyst at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. We also have Kim Macharia, who is the Executive Director at the Space Prize. And we also have María Antonieta Socorro Jáquez Huacuja, who is the Minister Counsellor, Permanent Mission of Mexico to the United Nations. And then we also have joining us virtually Anuradha Damale, who is a Policy Fellow and Programme Manager at BASIC, and also Nivedita Raju, who is a researcher at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Over to you, Patricia.
Thank you very much indeed. And it's my great honour and privilege to be introducing this panel today on a really important topic, which is, how do we make sure that space is really for all humanity? How do we make sure that people are included really and truly in this important debate? So perhaps I could turn first of all to you, Anuradha, to kick us off with some of your thoughts and comments on how we address this really significant issue and where you see the impact of this really inclusive approach, where you see it having most impact in our debate.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you, UNIDIT. Thank you, delegates, for being here today. This is a brilliant opportunity to talk about such an important issue, as Patricia has so well put. I'm going to provide very brief opening remarks because I think there's a lot to be said for the conversation that we're going to have. And what I want to do is avoid going through what I like to call the hits. So I'd like to think by now that we all have been engaged in some form of a discussion about having more diversity in the field, and what that leads to is having a more inclusive and accessible field as a means to reach equity within the field. This is something I think we've all talked about, I'd hope, at some event or the other, and so I don't want to go into the weeds of that particular issue. To be a little bit cheesy, the P in PAROS is about prevention. And I think we are very lucky within the space security realm that we are still able to be preventative rather than reactive when it comes to diversity, inclusion and equity, to ensure that we don't end up snowballing into a dangerous power structure within our field. So there are some key seeds for discussion that I'd like to plant. The first one, and we're going to jump right into it, is into how capacity building needs to evolve and improve. So the field, the world, regions aren't homogenous. Groups of people aren't homogenous. And so the methods for engagement that need to be two-way and truly two-way need to be specific. They need to be sensitive, because threat, priority, securitization depend on perspective, experience, history, and context. So we need to be working, for instance, perhaps with more local experts over time. We need to be learning from our mistakes. We need to be learning from these processes. And we need to be working in depth and be willing to be region specific when we do this, or country specific when we do this. And like I said, this can't be something that can be achieved in one go. It needs to happen very slowly over time. The second point I want to make is more to do with the talent retention in the field. So coming from science and technology, the issue of retention in the workforce is something that, we looked at a lot in physics. It was a huge problem, and it continues to be a problem. The conversation is always, how do we get more diversity into the field, and not how do we retain diversity in the field? How do we make these individuals, groups of people feel safe, feel like they can stay, feel that they feel secure and represented while they are in? And I think that that is also something that is locality specific, it's region specific. It's not going to be one solution that fits all. And when we prioritize homogenous approaches to equity, diversity, and inclusion, we run the risk of stopping the effects. For instance, if we just look at women in space, prioritizing a smaller group of women who are going to be more likely to have access to those opportunities and then end up at a plateau, which is exactly what happened within physics. So having more flexible and dynamic methods to engage with lots of different groups is incredibly important. The third point I wanted to raise in this initial remarks were to do with cross-field, cross-region, or other collaboration. So I think we can agree that in an ideal world, best idea wins. It shouldn't be that who the idea came from or where the idea came from. It should be that it was the best idea. And the way to achieve that best idea is by collaborating more and you know, creating a table where you can have as many voices from as many different regions and fields represented. We run the risk seriously of missing out on solutions, missing out on policy ideas, and missing out on lessons learned from other fields or other disciplines within space security or within space in general, if we do not involve them in our conversations and we do not involve them in that implementation and reflection process as well. And then the final point I want to make, and then I will yield the floor, is how we speak. So how we speak as a field, and I mean a shared language, but I also mean, you know, whether we are academicizing, I don't know what the word is here, but whether we are making everything sound a lot more exclusive than it is, and how dangerous that can be actually for inclusion and for making something feel accessible. Because it's one thing to do outreach, but your outreach can't be passive. We can't just be putting things out there if they're not going to be understandable, if they're not going to be accessible, if they don't exist in a language and in a format that is usable for a large group of people. So how we speak and carry out our work is something that I really think we should be reflecting on as a group. Thank you very much for having me, and I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that, you know, this is such an important conversation, and how we speak, how we communicate to the wider population. You know, we can often speak in ways that exclude, particularly when we use jargon. Human beings do that without realizing it perhaps, but the whole purpose of it is to form an inclusive group, which of course then by necessity then excludes a whole load of people. So how do we do that? I'm going to turn now to Tony. Tony, you know, you've spent a number of years looking at the whole aspects of disarmament and including the issue of PAROS. And you've also spent many years in New York, and you've been involved in the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And I wondered if you could give us your reflections coming from Mexico with all of that experience in the UN at the international level.
Thanks, Patricia, and thank you to Unidir for including me in this very interesting panel. I agree with the previous speaker that we have already established, and we have already mentioned many times yesterday, for example, that there is a call and a need for greater inclusivity, and that all the sectors and many groups, for example, minority groups or different groupings need to be included and need to be represented. But I think that there is a little bit of a misunderstanding of what inclusivity means, and I want to address that besides the women, peace and security issue, which is very pertinent. So first and foremost, the pandemic has taught us that security is multi-sectorial, that there are a lot of threats and a lot of issues regarding security in general that don't have to be related to only military safety and security or to security in the in the broadest sense of the term, that have to do with other aspects and other aspects of security that are not only military. So that's why a lot of sectors have to be included and represented. But there are a lot of challenges for the participation of these sectors, as has been said before, especially women and the inequality in the participation of delegations that we also addressed yesterday. But I think that the real challenge, and that's why I said that there is a misunderstanding, is the meaningful participation of these sectors. And I think that the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is one of the best guidelines and aspirational from the conceptual side that we need to look at. Participation of the sectors must not be a token representation. I think that that's the challenge. It has to be meaningful participation. So what I am saying is that the challenge is not to include women in a panel or to look for women students or to reinforce participation of women in science, technology, and mathematics in STEM. That is okay. I mean, I'm not saying that that's something that we shouldn't aim for or continue championing. I think that that's very important. But what the missing link is, from my point of view, especially in disarmament processes and multilateralism in general, is the meaningful participation of these women. That means that more women and more minority groups are active participants in the decision-making processes. So the meaning of this is from the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and that has been explained in Resolution 1325, that I think, if I am not mistaken, is having its 22nd birthday today or yesterday, by the way. So the Women, Peace and Security Agenda from the Security Council establishes that women must be participating in the peace processes and should not be regarded only as part of the problem to solve or as victims, for example, victims of violence, victims of conflict, but must be considered agents of change, agents of peace, and participating in peace processes can ensure not only the inclusivity that we are aspiring to, but also a more lasting and sustaining peace. That is a concept that we have to take into consideration when we regard inclusivity as an aspiration in all fields of multilateralism, especially in PAROS. So inclusivity means that all the views must be regarded as valuable in the decision-making process. And that is something that I think that we still need to be working on, because sometimes we are more focused on representativeness, to have all the sectors included, and, for example, in a delegation or in a contest or in a publication, that all views are represented. Or, for example, when organizing these types of conferences, that there are many groups represented. But the views have to be valued as important and taken into consideration, so that we don't produce one-size-fits-all solutions. I think that in 2006, I want to refer to something that was published by UNIDIR, that I think is a very valuable piece of work that we should revisit, which is a substantive study published by UNIDIR in 2006 called "The Value of Diversity in Multilateral Disarmament Work." I highly recommend it. It is a little bit technical, but I think that it is important. It concludes. It is written by Ashley Thornton and John Bory. They conclude that the different fundamental preferences produce different assessments of the value of potential solutions. And by encouraging those diverse ways of searching for solutions, it is probable that over time the modification of initial fundamental preferences of as they develop in the negotiating process has a better way or a better chance to produce a solution. So this means that if we have more views, we have better chances to get a possible solution. And I think that from the moment that in time that disarmament multilateral fora started to include more diverse views, it has produced better results. Unfortunately, in this piece of work of UNIDIR and in real life, we have a tendency to identify diversity in different ways. For example, we think that all the multilateral work, for example, a United Nations meeting, is very diverse because we have diplomats from potentially 192, 93 states. But that's not diversity, really, because all of them are diplomats and all of them might be experts of the same specialty. What we need is to have opinions and valuable contributions from other sectors of society, like not only civil society, but also academia, also interests group, industry, private sector. We have already addressed this in different panels. So my last point on this issue, because we could speak about this for hours, is that if we see what has worked in the recent negotiations of multilateral disarmament instruments, for example, the Landmine Convention, the Cluster Munitions Convention, the ATT, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, is that all of these processes were focused first on a human security approach or an approach that has to do with the interest of preventing and solving the humanitarian impact of weapons in this case, but also because in the decision-making process, the views from civil society and from academia and from the private sector, in the case of the Chemical Weapons Convention, for example, very clearly, were taken into consideration. And they produced a quality product that has changed the views and the dynamics of mainstream language, for example. Now we have a different dynamics in the room. We can question the effect of these treaties, and we can question if this is a model applicable to PAROS. Of course, and I am not saying that all of these models are a pattern or a guideline for anything, because what we need to deviate a little bit is from this idea that one size fits all. But I think that it is important to look at the processes and how diversity has been included in these processes to have a product that is very different to the ones that we had before. Because in the case of prevention of an arms race in outer space and other issues related to the outer space security, we have not tried that. We have not tried this type of processes. So that's why I mentioned this as a point of reference and as a way to include the value of inclusivity from another paradigm, which is the not only the representation, but the value of including different points of views to try to find a different type of solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. It was really useful bringing in all the other processes as well, I think, and looking at it from that human security approach. And I was thinking how much what you were saying links to what Anu was saying about expertise and making sure that we have the full range of expertise, so that that is, you know, one of the strongest cases for making sure that we are inclusive, so that we get to the best set of solutions for everybody. I'm going to turn now to bring in somebody with industrial experience and who has understood and really obviously values encouragement within the field, and that's Kimberly. So Kimberly, I wonder if you could give us your views from your really interesting background and you know, how the industrial sector, maybe through things like the Space Prize, etc., might work better with the international security community.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Macharia. So happy to be here and so happy to see diversity being included as a primary topic in this forum. I really believe that creating a more diverse space economy is essential to creating a unified global space economy. And I think if we can achieve a unified global space economy, we can therefore have a safe and prosperous space ecosystem that truly benefits all of us. And a big part, I think, of how we get to that is switching up the narrative of how space is perceived. I think that's an essential issue when it comes to why we don't have as many diverse actors in the field, is that people don't understand the value of space, why it matters, how it influences countless aspects of our everyday lives. And I think if we can start to nail that, start to further dive into this concept of universal space literacy, we can therefore encourage people to engage in and pursue the newfound pathways that we are all working to create within our various positions and roles. So 3 key things that I think are essential to getting us there, to creating this unified global economy, is centered around human capital, investments, and policy. And so when I think about human capital, I think about the fact that there is a talent gap in the space sector. For instance, in Seattle, there are 1,200 open jobs right now, despite the fact that we are in a recession. And despite the fact that there are so many open jobs, the industry is struggling to fill them because many people from outside of the space sector don't see a place for themselves in this field. They view the field as being elite and elusive. And those of us who are inside the field, I'd like to think that this community is fairly welcoming and kind, and very driven to create systems that benefit us all. And so how can we go about shifting this understanding of why space matters and trying to tackle this talent gap? And I believe a key part of that is starting to teach and leverage non-traditional ambassadors. So for instance, most people, they think about space, they think about rocket scientists and engineers. That is wonderful, but most people do not know rocket scientists and engineers. People know nurses, people know architects, people know construction workers. And these are all pivotal positions when it comes to increasing and enabling us to have a strong infrastructure to support our space security objectives. And so I believe that by starting to tap into and push forward these non-traditional ambassadors, for instance, I do work with the Colorado Council of Black Nurses, and we do education outreach efforts in Denver, Colorado. And I have found that leveraging this feisty group of women has been incredibly impactful when it comes to speaking to students and getting them to understand that, oh, I don't have to be in a technical field to have an impact on this industry. And I think given the fact that there are a lot of policymakers in this room, I think we can all attest to the fact that a variety of disciplines are required in order to achieve a safe and, again, secure space environment. So that is one part of it, addressing this talent gap. Another component is the investment gap. And I don't just mean investing in the sense of spending more money to do research and development on newfound technologies. I mean investing in these new communities that we want to get engaged in this field. And by that, I also mean actually going out to these communities. Oftentimes, when you go out to space events in the developing world, there are few attendees who come from some of the more established and influential organizations within the space sector. And I think that's quite a shame, because some of the most incredible conversations are happening in these developing countries around how to better leverage and use the wonders of the technology we're all currently supporting. And if we can get in these environments and have open, collaborative dialogue with these folks in their communities, I think that can be incredibly impactful. And I think we'll find a ton of new ideas that, again, can benefit the field widely. So investing, again, not just in supporting new companies, but also supporting individuals who come from these marginalized communities and getting directly into their communities. I think that's essential. And I also want to reference policy. Right now, there are tons of limitations and constrictions around how we can engage as international collaborators when it comes to our space endeavors. Obviously, for one big popular instance, or most notable instance, is the U.S. and China's relationship. Well, there are some incredible new efforts being done at a grassroots level right now that are working to dismantle the notions of what we think are possible when it comes to international space relations. And I want to mention one that I've been really impressed by. It's called MoonDAO. And let me take a quick step back in case for those who don't know what a DAO is. It is a decentralized autonomous organization. And it's essentially a member-owned community that doesn't have centralized leadership and tends to run on the blockchain. I've always been fascinated by DAOs because my first job in the space industry was at a blockchain company where we created a space debris-focused application. And there's this one specific community that's done some impressive work to bring together some folks who are truly outsiders when it comes to space endeavors. And this one is called MoonDAO. MoonDAO was formed a little less than a year ago. And in about 6 weeks, they raised $8 million. And with that $8 million, they are now creating systems and activities and initiatives that will work to bring together their international membership. And they, again, consider themselves to be an international collective of people united by the mission of decentralizing access to space research and exploration. One of their first initiatives that they did when they launched was run a contest to send someone to space. They sent their first citizen astronaut to space in August. They sent a famous YouTuber. But what I'm really intrigued by with what they're doing with their second citizen astronaut is that in the spring of next year, they are set, as long as things go according to plan, to send the first Chinese person to space from American soil. And given the constrictions around U.S. and China's relationships in space, I think that's pretty noteworthy. And the way in which they are self-organizing and their additional ambitious initiatives and a desire to come together in a really unique way to advance their desire to see the space economy be truly unified, I think is going to shake up the way in which the international public sector engages in the world of space. And so I think it's really important for us to start to really reflect on how space can be leveraged to mitigate terrestrial geopolitical tensions and look into these grassroots organizations and start to implement their learnings, their insights into what we're doing so that, again, we who are in positions where we have a bit more influence and reach than others, can start to have real, genuine impact. And I also want to mention an additional point, and I think I would love to perhaps get into this later on in our conversation, is thinking about, again, human capital, investment, and policy. There are certain organizations, we've been talking about ASAT missions over the last few panels, and there's a couple countries who have engaged in ASAT missions who are largely driving some of the key investments being made in the space economy across Latin America and Africa. And I think it's really crucial that we start to reflect on what the long-term implications of this could be when it comes to security, when it comes to certain countries ignoring the value and input of the developing world. What are the long-term results going to be if other folks who are engaging in certain irresponsible acts are starting to make certain investments in these communities? What are the long-term impacts of that? And so I think it's crucial that we start to really reflect sooner rather than later on the value of diversity when it comes to space security. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. And that was really, I had a quick Google of MoonDAO when you spoke, and realized I missed the NFL opportunity to win a place in going into space. NFT, sorry, going into space. That was the wrong thing. So really appreciate that. It sounds fascinating. And I want to go on from your talk to talk to Benjamin about this issue of the next generation, which I know you've been working on, Ben, and also, from the United States, how much you see the issue of inclusivity factoring into some of the debates that are going on there at the moment, particularly when it comes to space security. We've seen, of course, the adoption of the new step towards ASAT restrictions. So if you could say some of those things, it'd be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks for having me, especially to Unidir. It's wonderful to be on this panel, and it's also really wonderful to see the continuation of this thread across years now of Unidir putting on this conference. I know it's been a long-standing impact area for inclusivity and gender balance among panelists and also participants. So getting into some of the issues here, I really would like to hammer home some of the things that Kim said just a few seconds ago about the way that inclusivity is absolutely necessary for legitimate and long-lasting decisions in space, and especially in space security. And thinking about what think tanks can do, and especially think tanks that are at least in part based in the United States. Carnegie we like to call ourselves the global think tank, but I'm based in Washington, which has pluses and minuses. But we do a couple things to break down what a think tank has done and how we've seen that shift. We often stake out unconventional recommendations. We might do a longitudinal coverage of an in-depth or ongoing issue. And often we convene groups, kind of like this one, or connect subgroups across issue areas, or provide space for an implementation mechanism or other problem-solving group. We no longer do those with tight Rolodexes. It's really expanding. The unconventional recommendations are now targeted often toward emerging or non-traditional space actors, offering different ways for them to develop their agency and to really impact these decisions and not just be at the table, but participating at the table in meaningful ways. We might think about our audience for new stakeholders and target that ongoing coverage about a longitudinal issue for people other than 3 men at the Pentagon. We're looking at around the world, these issues have a lot of impact, and looking to see where the knowledge gaps are and where we might be able to provide some sort of capacity building in terms of bringing up the collective understanding and knowledge about space. And the subgroups that we hope to connect are more diverse, not only in purposes and aims, but also in the common linkages among the participants in those groups and among the group-to-group dynamics. So those characteristics of our work, especially in space on the macro level or the meta level, we have to do those things, not just because they're the right thing to do and they're good ideas, but because the actors in space are changing. We're seeing more actors. We're seeing more actors benefiting from space and more people realizing the benefits of space and realizing what they might be able to benefit from space in the future, or how they might be able to benefit from space in the future. That increased pool has a lot of benefits, also has some challenges. There are more competencies, which means that there are differing expectations of what responsible behavior looks like in space. We heard either earlier today, or both today and yesterday, definitions of what is responsible varies culture to culture, state to state, actor to actor, subgroup to subgroup. There are different sensitivities. Certain actors are very sensitive because they're running sensitive security missions. Some are not so sensitive because it's a highly replaceable space system or highly fixable space system for a crude term. That leaves a lot of room for interpretation, which leaves a lot of room for misinterpretation. So if we get down to how we can secure space and how we can secure access to space for not just those that enjoy access to space now, but future generations and future actors, the way that we have to do that is to tamp down on that misperception or the potential for that misperception. The condition that we see now of a deteriorating security network and a deteriorating safety network, frankly, is quite concerning, and to promote the ways in which we can all benefit from space, we truly need to raise the collective bar. So getting back to that second point where our addressable audience is now no longer just Silicon Valley, DC, and Florida. It's now Indonesia and Nigeria, and states that have stakes not just in benefiting from space, but becoming their own agents and becoming really valued members of the negotiation process. Because frankly, if we don't do that, if there's not if we don't make space and allow those conversations to happen organically and not just to a specific block-based order, we're going to have, I wouldn't call them illegitimate agreements, but less than legitimate agreements. We might have agreements that, if only organized by 6, 7, 8, a dozen states, what happens when we have 30 states who come to the table now? That's a really big issue. If those states who are now at the table with competencies with benefits, if they don't see their interests being valued, and if they were not part of the debate in the first place, that's a quick crumble that happens to in that network. I'll turn it back there.
Thanks very much indeed, Ben. I'd like now to turn, certainly not least, but last on our panel, to Nivedita from CIPRI. Nivedita, you have not only your technical background, your knowledge of all the legal issues and the aspects of space law, and your intellectual work, but you've also been doing a huge amount of work on things like the schools of equality in India, and also the UN Space for Women. So I wondered if you could bring some of those aspects into your presentation.
Patricia, and thank you for this invitation. This is a very important topic, and it is increasingly being recognized in different fora. So it's very promising to see, and this panel is very welcome. Just echoing the words of my co-panelists here on language, on jargon, on avoiding tokenism and aiming for meaningful diversity. And I actually wanted to touch on something that Kim presented, and when she mentioned the value of space in our daily lives. Our daily lives do depend on space technologies, but I think we need to think more about the fact that our daily lives also look very different around the world. And so for progress on space security governance, we need these perspectives from developing states, from middle powers, and from the global south. And notably, these are not all the same. So it's very important to recognize that in the space context, because many of these states have clear space ambitions, with some of them now even being spacefaring. And what we need is dedicated engagement with these actors to fully understand different national contexts. And putting my legal hat on for a minute, under international space law, ensuring that these states contribute to space security governance, this not only reflects obligations under the Outer Space Treaty, under Article 1, but the overall spirit of cooperation throughout the treaty, and of course supports the 1996 Benefits Declaration as well. And so for PAROS, for all space governance processes, I'd emphasize that need for engagement with national and regional perspectives. And sometimes these two are confused as well. So doing so in a non-hierarchical manner, I think this also kind of points to the concept of intersectionality. And Patricia, as you mentioned, this is some of the work that I've been doing, both in research and through facilitation, because it is through an intersectional approach that we can seek to achieve more meaningful diversity. This can allow us to achieve more insight into various national contexts. And that is also, of course, closely linked with understanding different national contexts on gender. The UN admirably strives for gender equality, but it's also a challenge that we're seeing that there are different positions regarding gender. And I would argue that this is largely attributed to limited data on states and stakeholder views. In fact, earlier this year, CIPRI had coordinated a seminar on behalf of the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium on gender in arms control and disarmament. And we discussed how it is unclear to many what gender perspectives, what gender even means. Gender is still conflated with binary understandings of sex. Progress on gender is still reduced to women's participation. And as pointed out before, there's also a dangerous tendency to homogenize experiences based on a particular type of woman. And this certainly does not lead to any kind of meaningful inclusivity. Certainly the work has been promising, but these are challenges that we should think about based on vocabulary and different contexts. And so thinking about intersectional approaches to space governance, I think that it also points to the fact that barriers to participation in space security, this is not the same in every state. Perhaps there are similarities, but every national context is unique. And going back to Article 1, yes, it does refer to mankind, and it demonstrates in its wording that there is an assumption of a specific experience of men as the norm. But interpreting Article 1 effectively and in a more inclusive and diverse manner, we cannot simply argue for the word to be interpreted as humankind if that represents a very fixed and a very small category of women. And so more women in the room is indeed necessary, but this can feed the problematic view that diversity or inclusion is achieved when there are more women in the room, and that is simply not accurate, especially if that is limited to women from only one part of the world. Taking such an approach would in and of itself be exclusionary, especially under UN processes and under international law. And for these reasons, because we have these data gaps and this lack of understanding, I also caution against naming and shaming as an approach. naming and shaming some actors for perceived lack of inclusion, this can be ineffective and unhelpful when we discuss diversity in space, simply because space means something different to all of us in different contexts. And while it can be challenging to translate intersectionality into policy and practice, I argue that maybe taking this next pragmatic step, systematically learning more on national and regional perspectives through intentional, sensitive, and non-hierarchical engagement, this could help us maybe achieve more progress in PAROS by meaningfully including these perspectives and hopefully move us towards space governance, well, at least one step closer. So I'll save the rest for discussions, I think, waiting to jump into that, but thank you.
Thank you, Nivedita, and thank you for, you know, really expanding out the whole issue and the complexity and interconnectedness of the way that we think about inclusivity and who we're including. Again, this is a major problem in the international community, in that, you know, we tend to have these sort of stereotypical approaches, even when we have moved beyond the completely exclusive domain that it used to be, and that's really important for us to think about. So, I mean, when we think about space, we're thinking very much about the now and the future, and trying to create a new way of thinking for spacefaring, for the opportunities that space provides humanity is so very important. So I'm going to go out now to our audience. We have some questions in the chat. Let's go to the floor first, and then we can go to, I'll try to intersperse them a bit.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead if you could introduce yourself for the people virtually especially. Thank you.
Hello. Well, firstly, I want to thank Mrs. Lewis and Ms. Ortega for accepting my question, and to the panelists for great statements so far. My name is Ava Hutchison. I'm a student at the Institut des études politiques de Paris and the Université de Genève. And I have a question regarding a phenomenon in the past decade of the proliferation of space task force based within state militaries. Some say in violation of the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. This has occurred in my own home country of the United States, also in states like France and India. However, these task force are rather made up of people with expertise in certain fields. Is there opportunity for collaboration with certain actors that come from these backgrounds, or does, is there really no opportunity? Do they stand in violation of the pursuit and the goals of PAROS? This is a question that is open to any of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think what I might do, if you don't mind, is just take one from try to be equitable and take one from the Q&A online. How do the people in the panel evaluate the bilateral statements on not being the first to place weapons in space that Russia has been signing with a number of nations, including a lot of non-spacefaring ones, in terms of contributing to the diversity in the PAROS process? So at that, I'll turn to Anu, please.
Firstly, I want to extend well, first of all of the panelists were brilliant. I've learned so much, especially hearing from Kim, going back to the discussions in industry and STEM. It's just fascinating to me. So very quickly wanted to touch on what I thought was a really interesting question on the collaboration with things like Space Force and like military space task forces. So I think, and this is a very weird way to put it, I think this is where the issue of language comes up, right? And the issue of perception and threat perception comes up. Some people in some countries might think that, yes, we should be engaging with them because they are doing work on preventing an arms race in outer space. From their perspective, they think that having that military is a deterrent, and so that is prevention. But there will be a bunch of other countries and a bunch of other people that think that that is normalizing the idea of continuing to militarize outer space. And so it's not okay to engage with and learn with those, learn from those bodies of people and bodies of experts. And so this is where the problem of defining and coming to a common and shared understanding of what this prevention of arms race in outer space is actually doing And this is where I think all of the panelists have touched on this. Until we go into communities and go and speak to people and understand what this actually means to them, what PAROS actually means to them, we're not going to know how to collaborate effectively and holistically with everyone in the network. And I mean everyone. So I personal views aside, these space forces or space task forces exist within our space security network. They exist within the space security system. And so you do have to account for them when you're drawing out your space system map, which I hope more and more countries are starting to do, because space is a system. You have to consider it as such. And so I don't think the answer to your question is as simple as yes or no from where I'm sitting. From a neutral or overall standpoint. And then coming to the question of, to make Patricia happy, I'll very briefly touch on AI. You can't separate AI from issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. AI is not neutral because people are involved in the design and delivery of AI. So when you have people within that loop, that means that there is some involvement within that loop. It is politicized, it's not neutral, it is securitized, and it will be affected by context and history again. So I'll stop there because I think I'd be more interested to hear from other people on the other questions as well.
Just to offer a comment on these questions from the point of view of governmental official. I think that there is a trend to identify a lot of the initiatives with militarization or non-militarization of outer space activities, and we need also to be more accurate, because we have seen across in this conference and across the multilateral settings, different multilateral settings, that not all activities that are military or that have a military component are hostile or contribute to weaponization of outer space. So we cannot say that automatically violate treaties or violate or not contribute to the prevention of an arms race in outer space. So I think that we would be more accurate if we continuously try to avoid the weaponization of outer space and to preserve the space free from conflict, or not consider outer space as a scenario for conflict. Okay, not only talking about militarization, because there are a lot of bilateral agreements and multilateral regional agreements between states that involve the military, but are not hostile or are not contributing to weaponization of outer space. So I wanted to mention that. And then the other thing that I just wanted to say very briefly is that participation of more states that are not traditional or considered space-faring nations in the international context or in multilateral settings through bilateral agreements or through participation of in initiatives or in declaratory processes, I think it's very valuable, because we can get closer to common understandings. But the most important thing is to avoid the us versus them dilemma, in which a few delegations or a few countries decide over the rest of the room, of the countries of the room. As Ben was saying, that we have to sit more countries at the table, and I always say, yeah, if we are sitting at the table, we prefer to be eating, not being part of the menu. And if we don't have enough delegations participating at the negotiating tables, then we end up in the menu. Thank you.
So, is there anyone else from the panel in the room?
I just wanted to touch on the question centered on education. I think as of now, the cost around space education specifically tends to be just cost prohibitive for most people. You look at the cost of tuition to go to the one university centered around space, the ISU, and it's most people who come from the developing world who cannot afford to go to the university. If they get in, they have to deny their admission, which is why, for those who don't know, my nonprofit Space Prize that I run, we are distributing free education curriculum centered around space for middle and high school students. We're getting the curriculum translated into different languages as we speak, so that we can start to just have people have this core foundational knowledge, again, of why space matters and of its influence and how it impacts countless industries in their personal countries. And I think addressing this education issue and doing direct outreach to folks who tend to be excluded from certain educational opportunities centered around space is going to be pivotal towards us shifting the pipeline problem that's plaguing the industry. And I think that in turn will help significantly with the long-term equity issues that we're going to see as well. Especially given the fact that, as many of us know, the value of the space sector is going to be at least $1 trillion by 2040. And a number of folks are unaware that they have a chance to get in on what the future of the financial side of the global space economy looks like. And I think educating people on the growth potential of the economy, the opportunities that are currently available is pivotal towards us addressing these diversity and inclusion issues as well.
Excellent point. Thank you so much, Kim. Nivedita.
I think my co-panelists have very beautifully articulated responses to some of these questions already. I have to say I really appreciate the sitting at the table eating and menu analogy very much. So thank you for that. I thought maybe it would be helpful to respond to two of these questions. One in the chat about bilateral statements and the no first placement. And for that, I think it's important to recognize, regardless of political views or standpoints, that these are still ways of engaging in these different ways, in these different forums and in different manners on space security issues. And there are forms of engagement from different perspectives, and otherwise these perspectives may either be unheard or maybe not acknowledged. And so I think that it should still be viewed positively as forms of engagement, regardless of what those political views would be. And the second question about education, and actually maybe even clubbing that a little bit with mentorship. I think for schools, it's important first to see what the target groups are, because schools themselves are also all of these different ecosystems, right? So when at Schools of Equality, when there was gender sensitization trainings done, we would kind of break this up into educating students of different age groups, educating the teachers and the educators themselves, and parents as well. So what exactly is it? What is the messaging that we're trying to convey? Are we trying to impress upon them how useful space is and how reliant we are? Are we trying to induce them to get into the field? What age groups are we targeting? I think that these are all very useful questions to consider from the education standpoint. And I think, as Kim already mentioned, scholarship opportunities. This is something that there's always room for more support, more funding for students from around the world. And I think that's something that could also be considered a big priority. The same goes for mentorship programs as well. I think that unfortunately, UN Space for Women had to end, but there are opportunities to revive it again and to revive more mentorship programs for all genders, for anyone who's curious to join the sector but is trying to find a way to get in. And again, not restricting this to one particular profession, but for all of these different forms of careers when it comes to space. So yes, very quickly responding to these three questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nivedita. I hadn't actually asked the question about mentorship and education. No, so it's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, so you've answered it, which is brilliant. I'm going to read it out because I'm sure some of the other people, I can see Anu raising a hand now, would like to address this, but I also want to go to the floor. So what I'm going to do, Anu, is I'm going to read out these two questions on education and mentorship, and then go to the floor, and then the panel will take the three questions together. And Nivedita, don't feel shy in coming forward for the other question that you haven't yet answered. So first of all, there was a question on in which way could schools and administration be involved as end users of space tech in everyday learning and developing skills? That's an interesting angle on the educational side. So it's sort of a combination of being part of the system and using it for developing education, learning and skills. And then there was a question on mentorship program. in which it's proposed a mentorship program in the space sector by what's called traditional senior males, whoever they are, to junior women in an effort to grow the future. A challenge to go beyond perceptions and think of gender equality. So what could we say to the establishment to seek out junior women and minorities in mentorship? So I'm dying to answer this question because, and I'm just throwing it into the room, and I know Anu will take this up, but my experience of mentorship is it's quite the other way around. That those people who imagine themselves to be the mentor are often actually in reality the mentee and are learning from the person that they imagine is junior to them. So I just want to throw that into the room to kind of turn it a bit on its head. Almu, if we could go perhaps to the question from the floor, that would be great.
Well, I bring you all much aloha from the islands of Hawaii. My name is Zephanie Smith-Eisenside. I'm thrilled to be here with you all. So I'm an advocate for civil and human rights, and I work with amazing people like Kim. Thank you so much for sharing today. To engage young people in diplomatic processes, but more importantly, I wear a number of hats like many of you do. One of those is a trustee with the NAACP or the NAACP Foundation, and we are working very hard to secure a future where everyone can exercise their civil and human rights in every aspect of life, free from discrimination. And this includes as we explore other places. We don't want to take the unresolved social ills with us when we go. And so I have a question just to drill down on what some of the panelists have touched on, is really where do we go from here? We don't know what we don't know, but we do have a pretty good sense of some of the challenges that lay ahead and really realizing the visions that we are rolling out here. So 2 questions. What are some of the roles and specific asks of civil society advocates who can engage and try to support policy as well? I teach at the University of Hawaii, and my husband's pursuing his PhD on topics about human rights in space. But what are some of the types of research questions we can be asking ourselves and our graduate students as well that you all think would be most impactful in terms of achieving our shared and common missions as well? So advocates and academia working together to help shape policy in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then if we could move to the question that we have closer to here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such a necessary panel on the entire event from Nivedita. Thank you. Tanyel Youssef, International Rep for Disarmament Affairs for Wilf UK. I'm also the Technology Developers Coordinator for the UK campaign to stop killer robots. So I am going to be asking the AI question. Anu made a really significant point in that the developers of AI can implant biases that can be a replication of some of the problems that we see that you've spoken to. But of course, we can also have another problem where you can't just insert certain demographics of people in a tokenistic way and expect that to solve the problem. So that's one question I wanted to put to you. The other is, of course, bias is inherent in programming. That's how things are built with backward propagation and all of those things. And when you have unpredictable complex systems, which we're, from ground to earth and the various nature of the supply chains that we have, when you have dual use systems and dual purpose systems, you have the complications of commercial, private, military, various enterprises, and the decision-making processes, and I mean the whether it's robotics or whatever we're talking about, the technological decision-making processes, the machine behaviors, before we even get into the social behaviors and the legal processes that we have to go to. How do you propose, when we're talking about the space domain, and of course ground networks too, how do you propose that in the legal and diplomatic spaces, we look to ensuring that unpredictable behavior and biases don't spill over into the kind of unintended consequences that of course not just replicate, but have an exponential threat in terms of indiscriminate and discriminate harms because of all of those complicating factors when you come to AI? Thanks.
Thanks so much. So 4 great questions: the issue of tech and education, the issue of mentorship. What research questions should be set for young students, and the issue about the unpredictability of machine decision making as well, with the whole other set of complexities in there. So if I could please, I'll turn, if you don't mind, to Anu first.
I'm going to go backwards. I'm actually going to start with Tanielle's question because that probably aligns the most with my sort of non-EDI expertise. So I touched briefly on space systems and systems theory in general. We've already seen within AI, like you mentioned, you know, the issues of machine decision-making spilling over into discrimination, such as, you know, AI being discriminate towards Black people in facial recognition technology in the UK. So we know that this is happening already. Within space, because there are so many different actors and there's so many different relationships and connections within those actors, it is a very complex actor network. And solving the issue of seeing how a technology is going to diffuse through that network is incredibly difficult. But if you do have a base level system map or framework within which you consider where this technology is going, that can be helpful in being preventative or, where necessary, reactive. So one way to do this is literally drawing out the system map, which is the actors, the networks, the political contexts that divide them or unite them, and sort of grouping them like that. The other way is doing futures work and scenarios work. So taking a futures wheel approach, which please do look up in your own time if you're able to. But the futures wheel approach allows you to look at first, second, and third order consequences of a single event, such as the deployment of a technology or the banning of kinetic ASAT tests, or a specific policy statement, and looks at how the first order, the second order, and the third order end up in different outcomes and how these outcomes are connected to each other. And there's all kind of cool stuff that you can do, including like designing a probability funnel, seeing, you know, what things are catchable, what things are, you know, what policies are likely to be more implementable, how this technology is going to diffuse, where the barriers are going to be. And I think that we as a security community, we know we're siloed, but I think we're particularly siloed from these systems theory and science policy experts. And that's, given that that's my expertise, it does get to me a little bit when that happens. So I think that we need to talk a little bit more about that. Going back to, and I'm so sorry, I've forgotten who asked the question, the attendee from Hawaii. So there are, at least in the UK, there are campaigns such as a campaign to stop killer robots, the CND, drone wars, so on. So these are more advocacy-based organizations, and they actually are already doing grassroots work and collaborating with schools and so on. And they've moved over into space as a domain to have that conversation, and go into schools, go into education systems and talk about, from their perspective, the issues with militarization of space and what we as individuals can do to get involved and curtail, or, you know, each of these organizations has their own goal, and so they discuss that goal. And so that collaboration is happening in the UK already. It might be something worth looking at if you haven't. On the question on mentorship panels, so firstly, yes, I don't know what a traditional senior male is. If you mean people that have been established and like are consistently benefiting from the way our field is designed, and systematically continue to benefit from that, then okay, I kind of understand what you're coming from here. But I want you to really consider the power dynamic and how difficult and how dangerous that would be if you did that. You know, as someone that was in that position a few years ago, I don't know that I would feel comfortable as a brown queer woman who has, you know, invisible disabilities, to be able to go into a space where I won't be recognized or seen because these people have not had the same lived experience as me. So I don't know that the power dynamic is conducive to feeling safe. And it's one thing to say that you need to go into the real world, but it's another thing to say that when you're in that stage of learning and growing, you should be in a safe environment where you feel understood, where you feel safe and able to make mistakes without feeling like you will be perceived to be making mistakes because of who you are. So I'd really like you to take a step back and consider that. And then finally, very briefly on the role of connecting space to education. So in theory, the civilian UK space program, so the UK Space Agency, since I think the early 2000s within their documents have always connected space and education, so space and schools, as one of the things that they talk about a lot. So there are organisations that collaborate with the UK government within the UK, such as UK SEDS, such as Space Careers, so on and so forth, that do not only talk about going into schools and saying this is why space is important, but also talk about the impact that space could have on innovating the education sector with government. I think there's more to do in that area. I think when our government has settled down a little bit, perhaps there'll be even more to do. But there are things happening, and I'm sure that there are things happening all over the world as well. So sorry, I went on for a bit there. I'll stop.
Not at all. No, that was really excellent, comprehensive approach to so many issues in that. And particularly taking what you said about the mentorship issue, Anu, and I think there will be others who want to take that up, I suspect. So could I perhaps turn to Ben, who I think Ben, if you wish to address any of the other questions that you didn't in the previous round, please do.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Getting back to the one of the questions earlier about engaging with the space security task forces within militaries. I think that it's incredibly important, as these are mostly younger, organizationally younger cadres, to understand that this is a really formative time. In some of the discussions that I've had with those types of organizations, there are gaps in their understandings of concepts like compellence versus deterrence, and that is really quite terrifying. If those basic, to some extent, concepts are mixed up or confused or conflated or otherwise blurred between, it becomes really difficult to display intent. And if that's what they're tasked to do, I have not little faith, but I have concerns about how that would be interpreted, displayed, and otherwise engaged with. To get to the other question about what types of questions should we be asking? One of the hot questions or hot takeaways that I took from last year's conference was the need to better understand the humanitarian consequences of conflict in space. One of the things that I think, especially from the perspective of this panel and from a perspective of gender inclusivity, is the consequences, the gender-specific consequences of space activities that might not be true conflict, or the things that are not uses of force in space, but also necessarily have gender-specific consequences around the world. I think that is an incredibly understudied issue, and I mean it would be great to just, I mean personally, for my curiosity, to understand how those. Not to say somebody else should be doing research for me, but that is one of the things that I think gets pushed down too far on research agendas, understanding how things short of conflict in space have distinct gender impacts. And the third question, which is now getting further away from me, so hopefully this is getting to the heart of it. To reduce tokenism, I think that space is a very unique environment in that there is a role for every country and for all communities around the world, in that space observation and space security, space situational awareness rather, is an inherently global pursuit. It's really incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to achieve that without cooperation, collaboration around the world and across communities, especially in states that have diverse communities that have space observation competencies. Raising the bar on observation and monitoring is not just for its own sake. There's obviously an important role for these states to understand and be able to adjudicate, based on their observations, any sort of agreements or security situations that they might see. If we have 160 countries coming with their own data and their own interpretations of that data and their own analyses that are not well shared or at least well understood across cultures and across states, there's not going to be a lot of trust in that system. If we have a more cohesive organization that has roles for all states to play, and all states trust each other in terms of their sharing, in sharing their data and sharing the way that they think about that data and the way they interpret that data, we get to a better place. I think that this is in contrast to the nuclear field, where a lot of the capacity building was pushed away or kept at arm's length for proliferation concerns, which legitimate. But in space, we don't really have that issue in the same way, and I think that that's one hurdle that we've at least taken away, and therefore we've got a little bit more of an open runway to build that capacity and to reduce tokenism and not have an eaten world, but everybody eats world, to continue the at-the-table metaphor.
I think the main concern with that was being eaten rather than eating. I think that's pretty clear. Perhaps, Tony, you'd like to go on next from that, and then I'll go to Nivedita, and then I'll go to Kim.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to offer an example of a good practice in mentorship that might be useful. I have the privilege of participating in the Young Women in Non-Proliferation Initiative of the CNS in Monterrey. And this initiative has matched women to encourage young women to participate in non-proliferation studies, multilateral work, but not only for diplomacy, but also for this studying. And I am a mentor in that program. I have been for 3 years. And I completely agree with what Patricia said about the education being more intended for the mentors than for the mentees, because of course there is a value if in learning from the different experiences of different backgrounds and interests of the young mentees that are interested in the field of non-proliferation, but also because we need to give a very, very strong value to the different experiences that age, different social backgrounds, different nationalities, different races, different academic backgrounds bring to the study of the non-proliferation in this case, in the case of the good practice that I'm sharing. So what I am saying is that these programs work. I think that it would be valuable to have a mentorship program, not only for women, but for young people interested in outer space security. I would be very much in favor of this, but it would have to be diverse, and it would have to take into consideration the richness and the backgrounds, baggage that can contribute to different types of solutions and to different types of approaches to the same issue of space security. So I wanted to mention that. And my other comment on the other question of participation of civil society. I think that civil society has demonstrated that it has a dual function, and I have not heard this issue being brought up in this conference, so I have to mention it. So besides the technical work and the advocacy work that civil society can bring to the multilateral work, there is also the accountability factor for delegations, for governmental delegations. So I think that civil society has, and this is not a championing for naming and shaming that I'm saying, but what I'm saying is that civil society has a role in keeping governmental delegations accountable of our own commitments, our obligations, and the way to ensure that previous agreements are being fulfilled, and there is a sense of compliance and fulfillment of agreements and obligations, especially in this field. I think that would be really necessary, and that would also contribute to the discussion and to enriching the dialogue that is needed with other sectors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. Important points, particularly on the issue of compliance, I think, and how to move forward on that. I wanted to talk to Nivedita now, and then on to Kim. So Nivedita, please.
Thank you, Patricia. I think I'm just going to quickly respond to, I think, the questions raised by Daniel earlier. For the link between the parallels and the links between AI and space, I think that that is something that the onus is on us as the research community to engage more, break out of our silos, I believe, as Anu mentioned earlier, and make sure that we're facilitating this kind of cross collaboration. And I think that will maybe help us get more tangible answers to these kinds of questions. And they are important questions. We do need answers to them. On Taniel's question about the legal and diplomatic side and biases and unpredictable behaviors in space, it's important, I think, again, for us to acknowledge that threat perceptions are subjective and these will be different based on the state. And so, in order to articulate ways forward and new norms, rules, and principles, the scope for this at the OEWG, I think the time is ripe for this engagement. Having been established through the General Assembly, this is a wide forum for states to participate and contribute their perspectives. And I think that when we're trying to encourage this as well, it's important that we are sensitive about our language. I know we spoke about jargon a bit earlier, but I'd also again just like to really drive home the point that even the ways that we speak about this should not be hierarchical. We need to be conscious about this, and there needs to be a shared willingness to learn about what space means to different states and different actors and from different regions. So I think that maybe by getting this information and by getting these different perspectives and engaging, hopefully we can take this work forward, and maybe that would make this I hope that addresses your question about biases and unpredictable behaviors. That's a really big overarching goal, but this I think would be one useful step forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Kim, if I can turn to you now.
I've definitely been resonating with a lot of the comments that I've heard from my fellow panelists. I think everyone's been pretty spot on with their remarks. Just a little things I wanted to add on. When it comes to education, I think an important thing for us to leverage is the influence of startups. I've found that through my work with my student groups and the contest that we run at Space Prize, leveraging startups to provide us with additional educational opportunities has been invaluable. I find that the unique opportunities and their willingness to engage in a very meaningful way is sometimes a bit easier and sometimes a bit more innovative than leveraging older, more established companies. For instance, Eat and Grow Systems, they do some fantastic agricultural work centered around space. There's also another company, I'm forgetting the name right now, but they develop satellite components, and they have been shocked by the way in which their new technology has been leveraged by students, specifically middle school students, to get engaged in space. And so I think there's a ton of opportunities to come from leveraging startups that are willing to invest into youth. Additionally, I think it's also crucial that we prioritize the SDGs in our education outreach as well. I think students really resonate with hearing the ways in which space, again, connects to and benefits our planet, and I think the SDGs are a remarkably easy way to start. For instance, just 2 weeks ago, I took a couple dozen students to the UN in the United States in New York, and we had a private conversation with the US ambassador to the UN. And just 6 months ago, only about half of the students, I would say, who were part of this program were truly space geeks and could really attest to the value of space. But after engaging in our program, they had all learned a lot and really bought into the narrative that we were trying to communicate. And I've watched them brilliantly share with the ambassador about the value of the SDGs and educate the ambassador on why space matters and its crucial importance. And so I think the SDGs are a really brilliant way to start. I found that to be really effective with all of our student groups across the globe. Additionally, kind of going on from there, I think leveraging the SDGs actually as well when it comes to engaging these kinds of thought experiments in reference to Stephanie's question on research topic ideas for her students. I think that having students really begin to tap into the openness, the malleable aspect of the space sector. Although space is not a blank canvas, it is younger and more malleable than most other sectors of comparable levels of influence. And I think we have to fully leverage that in order to get unique ideas that can propel us forward. And I think having students participate in thought experiments around SDGs, having them reflect on what would it look like to take an affirmative approach to diversity rather than this reactive approach that we're also driven to take. We can do that when it comes to engaging in the space sector, and I think we're at a really pivotal time where we should take advantage of it, especially over the next 2 to 5 years. I think if we, as an industry, especially in the security aspect as well, if we take advantage of the fact that the industry is so young and malleable and leverage these young people and take on their ideas and their free thinking, I think we'll really benefit from that. And I think there's a couple things that we can achieve through that, which is one major thing being cultural competence. I think cultural competence is one of the biggest threats to having a secure space environment, to having a secure space situational awareness domain. I think having students do research and really engage in that and support the active work that we're all doing in the international field would be incredibly beneficial. And again, leveraging, when it comes to cultural competence, one specific group that I feel like is always underrepresented and it's not spoken about enough are folks who come from Indigenous communities. I think Indigenous wisdom is really pivotal to the kind of work that we're doing, and I think it's imperative that we start to have more Indigenous communities in these conversations specifically. And to that effect, I want to jump on over to mentorship. I think that when it comes to this notion that sometimes mentees can teach mentors even more than they expected, I think the same thing is applicable when it comes to these unique ideas. I think it's really important to pursue and create more mentorship opportunities, specifically in space security, because of the kinds of conversations that we're having here today, the ideas that we're struggling with. I think creating more mentorship opportunities will therefore make it easier for us to engage young people and their ideas directly into these conversations. I think that is going to be invaluable. So I think those are my points on these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and you brought us to a perfect ending. I want to thank all of our panelists for this really excellent session. I mean, it's such an important issue, and I think you just put it, you said this is a pivotal time to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there, and particularly in getting young people from all over the world, from all different walks of life, from all different cultures, from all different disciplines, different ways of thinking, getting them into this area. And this is I think you're absolutely right, it's a critical time. The problem I have with this really fantastic panel is that I always get so full of optimism and joy when I listen to everybody. But then I go away and I go into this real world that we're inhabiting, in which there is often so much bad news with countries attacking each other and space being used for missiles, for being used for targeting, etc., etc. And I wonder, how in having this conversation, I guess the challenge that we're throwing out from this conversation is how do we use this extraordinary capability, this richness of diversity, this richness of knowledge to transform our security landscape in the space sector and all other sectors, of course, as well, but we're looking particularly at space, and to genuinely mainstream this real cause for optimism in the future and hope for the future. And I just want to throw that out to everyone in the room and for everyone listening online, is that, we need to go away from this and take what people have said and operationalize it, make it come real. And thereby, as everybody has said, invest in the future of space for the whole of humanity and not just for a select few, because we see where that leads. So thank you so much. Thank you, Unida. Thank you, Amu. Thank you for all of your colleagues for helping put this on. Thank you to everyone in the room for listening. I hope you found it as stimulating as I have, and I hope that you can go away and take some of these ideas and put them into your everyday work and make them come real. Thank you.